After James Harden was traded from the Houston Rockets, most people thought with the trade of James Harden, well, any hopes of them winning a championship or even competing full stop went out that same door. Now, I'm not here to tell you they're going to win a championship with this new roster. If you came for that type of video, I'm sorry, you're probably going to be disappointed, but I am here to talk about how this new look Houston Rockets team is actually doing a really good job of redefining how they play as a team and turning themselves into a pretty competitive team that could potentially make the playoffs. I don't know, it's still very early in the season and we haven't really seen them play together as a whole squad. But what they're doing after losing James Harden, I think it's really impressive and I think it deserves some kind of credit. Now, before I give them that credit, if you could drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. I make content like this every single day, so if you want to see more of that stuff, subscribe. Even if you don't, it's free, so that would be good as well. It'd just be much appreciated. So we know James Harden's last time as a Rockets player was against the Los Angeles Lakers on the 13th of January. It seems like it was a long time ago, but in reality, it was only a couple of weeks ago. But after that game, after Harden's last game, the Rockets had lost 4 out of their last 5 games and had a record of 3-6. Now, since then, Houston have gone 5-3. Now, I'm not going to put all the blame on Harden because I don't want to do that. They obviously had a lot of players missing at the time as well. But more importantly, since getting back their star players and bringing in a new star player in Victor Oladipo, they've gone 4-0 over the last 4 games. And they've boasted the best defensive rating in the league. Yes, this new look Houston Rockets team that doesn't have any defensive star. They don't have a Giannis or Rudy Gobert. They have a Christian Wood anchoring the defense who's solid, and we'll talk about that. They have boasted the best defensive rating in the league over the last 5 games of the season. And before you ask, yes, they've played okay offenses. I'm not going to sit here and tell you they've played fantastic offenses because they haven't. But apart from the Wizards who absolutely suck and the Rockets got a steal in John Wall as opposed to Russell Westbrook being on the team, apart from that team that they played who put up 88 points, the rest of the teams have been solid offenses. So it's not like they're playing against absolute scrubs. They're playing against reasonable offenses and it's keeping those offenses well below their usual seasonal averages. But I think before we talk about how their defense has been so good, let's just talk about defense as a whole and how I think a team becomes a good defensive team, because sure, you have teams that just have so much defensive talent, and we see that work as well. Like the Lakers are a good example. They've got a good defensive coach and a good philosophy, but they've just got so much talent, it's gonna work. The Rockets and other teams that I've seen, like the Knicks, for example, they were the 23rd ranked defense last year. They bring in a new coach, they are all bought into the new system, and now they're the 3rd ranked defense in the league. Do they have some kind of absolute defensive monster? Mitchell Robinson's solid, but they don't have a fantastic defensive team just looking at the names on the paper. But when you commit to one style of play and you commit to playing hard defense every single possession, making the right rotations, I'm pretty comfortable saying you can always be an above average defense as long as you don't have any kind of terrible defenders. If you have average defenders and you put in the right system and get the right out of them, you can be an above average defense. You can maybe even be a top 10 defense, or in the case of the Houston Rockets, you can be the best defense in the league. Now, I think the Rockets have some legitimate defensive talent. You've got the likes of Oladipo. Their other 2 star players in John Wall and Christian Wood are probably above average defenders at their position. You wouldn't have thought I'd say that about Wood heading into the season based off what he did in Detroit, but he's been pretty solid defensively. He's still got his downfalls, but he's okay. John Wall as well, for a guard, is an upgrade on the likes of Russell Westbrook. But outside of those guys, I think it's important to mention that you look at this team and you look at the bench, the role players. Often with teams, they might fit the bench with guys who can score and create offense. The Rockets have gone the other way. They've fitted the bench with defensive-minded players. You look at the likes of David Nwaba, Sterling Brown, Jayshawn Tate, Daniel House. All of these guys are defensive-first players who can do a few things on offense, but their main priority is to defend, and they're doing a very good job at that. So I think that's a different approach that they've taken, and it's working out for them so far. And just getting back to that point when I was talking about how a team has to buy in to be a good defense, it's easy to see how this Rockets team is buying in and could continue to buy in. You had a player literally say to their faces, they're not a good enough team. Now, the reality is they might not be good enough, but if you're an NBA player, you're not copying that from someone who is considered the face of your franchise to pretty much just say, look, I've played 10, 15 games with these guys. They're just straight up not good enough. That's disrespectful, and that's a way to galvanize a group, which we've seen it happen. But outside of that, you've got guys with chips on their shoulders. Christian Wood undrafted, Jayshawn Tate undrafted, Daniel House undrafted, Victor Oladipo, John Wall traded. There's reasons for all of these guys to be locked in, and sometimes it can be corny, but when you talk about motivation, culture, playing for one another, That all ties into defense, and I think the Rockets have a lot of that going for themselves with the chips on their shoulders, with what James Harden said, with the new galvanization, and with the new head coach, who I haven't even talked about and might arguably be the biggest piece in turning this team's defense around, Silas. I think what Silas has done really well is coach to his personnel. Like I mentioned, Wood is probably an above average defender, but he's not a defensive stalwart. He's not Rudy Gobert, Anthony Davis, the list goes on. You know the players. He's not that kind of guy that you're going to set a defense around. However, he's done a really good job at, instead of prioritizing protecting the paint like a lot of teams are opting to do now, he's prioritizing not allowing the three-point shot. The Rockets are doing a particularly good job of running teams off the three-point line. They're conceding the least three-point attempts in the league, plus the least three-point makes in the league. Very impressive stats, and stats that are normally going to be related to a good defense. Outside of just protecting the three-point line, what they're doing is they're averaging around league average in terms of attempts at the rim, but more importantly, they're conceding more shots in the mid-range, which is exactly what you want. From a defensive standpoint, that's what you want. Like, you got to coach to your personnel, and you'll come up against teams that have better mid-range shooting than other teams, and maybe you adjust. But in general, if you're just looking at a blueprint, conceding more mid-range shots, not conceding three-point shots, and being around league average in terms of shots at the rim, that's a pretty good defensive blueprint, particularly when you don't have a great rim protector or a great defender, full stop. You've got a number of good, solid guard defenders that are doing their job at keeping opposition teams off the three-point line. But tying into this three-point success, I think it's important to note, sometimes through the first 15 games of the season, you can see outliers. Some teams just get lucky. It can happen defensively. You can get lucky. Teams can just miss a lot of shots. And that's what some people are saying with the Knicks. Sorry, Knicks fans, I know you've got something going for you. Some people think that's just luck. They're holding teams to over 5% below their three-point shooting percentage, which history says that's not going to continue. But the Rockets, on the other hand, they're not really thriving off holding their teams below their three-point percentage. They're doing so, but more importantly, they're just preventing the three ball altogether, which is more sustainable in my opinion. But that's just the defensive side of the ball, which I thought I'd talk about, because when you look at this Rockets team, the reason they've gone on a 4-game winning streak and look like maybe a playoff team again, maybe, I'm not going to make those assumptions yet. The reason they look like a much better team is because of defense, and that's something that they're really thriving in, that aspect of the game. But there's still a few different aspects of the team that we can talk about. There's always reason to talk about Christian Wood. There's never a bad time to talk about Christian Wood, because when you're putting up 23 points a game, 23 and 10, it's just ridiculous. He went undrafted. You know the story. I don't need to tell you the story, but to see his bag of moves, which I saw in Detroit, I don't see why you would put a ceiling on this guy. He's getting better defensively. His offensive talent is just, it's up there with the very best. Honestly, it's up there with the very best, particularly at his position. There's no reason this guy should have a ceiling. There's no reason all-star is the ceiling. Like, why not aim higher? There's nothing to suggest to me he doesn't have more room to grow, which is scary and so good for Rockets fans. He's definitely the franchise piece, and he's just been fantastic. Christian Wood, never a bad time to talk about that guy. Another player, similar position, the same position, DeMarcus Cousins. One of the more interesting players on this Rockets team. Obviously, some people still think he's the DeMarcus Cousins of old because he had one good game. That's not the case. Rockets fans, you know that, and most fans know that. Some people, they're just caught up in the past, ESPN included, which, can we talk about that? ESPN talking about the big three as though it was DeMarcus Cousins, James Harden, and John Wall, or it was DeMarcus Cousins, Victor Oladipo, and John Wall. Are you just going to disrespect Christian Wood like he hasn't been averaging 23 a game? Yes, they were making posts. Even after the season started, they were still considering the big three with Cousins in it. This isn't to disrespect Cousins, because I think he can be a solid player off the bench, but I think that's what he is. You've got to temper your expectations for him. He's getting better. He did show signs of really good promise just a couple of games ago where he dropped like 30 and 15, which was fantastic to see. The first time he'd done so in multiple years. If he can continue to progress and have a few more huge games, maybe you can restructure your team and go with the Twin Towers. But for now, DeMarcus Cousins is best suited to the bench, and he's doing a good job. Another player that's suited to the bench is Eric Gordon, who's doing fantastic as well. I thought I'd just mention him because he was someone that I had pinpointed as someone who could make a big difference for this Houston team. We know he was such a good sixth man during their best year, and now he's getting back to his best. He's averaging 20 points a game off the bench. He's being fantastic. He's still inconsistent. That's pretty much what happens with every bench player. Every guy that relies on their jump shot a lot is going to be an inconsistent scorer at times. But Eric Gordon, he's just been fantastic, and he deserves some kind of credit. Then you have Victor Oladipo and John Wall. I think Wall still has the intangibles. That's what's most important to note. He's still fast. He still shows defensive intensity and effort. His leadership looks great. He still can make plays for his teammates. All of those things that people questioned if he'd still have, particularly the speed and athleticism, he still has it, and he's still thriving getting to the rim. I heard him talk about how he thinks he needs to be better attacking the rim. Well, he's doing pretty damn good, averaging around 7 attempts a game and close to 60% at the rim. That's really good. So he's not struggling there, but if he thinks he can get better, by all means get better. That would be fantastic. But the main thing for John Wall is getting his shot, and Victor Oladipo. I'll put them in the same sentence because they're both struggling from three. Neither of them are struggling at the rim. Victor Oladipo, similar to John Wall, is also thriving getting to the rim. But we need one of those guys to get their shot just pretty good, because otherwise, if you have two guys shooting around 29% from three, that could be a concern. That could be a definite concern, because all of a sudden that spacing looked pretty bad. Jae'Sean Tate isn't a great shooter. PJ Tucker is a solid shooter when he's not asked to be like a shooter, if you know what I mean. He's not someone you want to rely on to create gravity for your team. That's definitely not his role. So you need one of those guys, or ideally both of those guys, to get their shot back to where they can get it. John Wall, if there's something to hold on to, he's shooting a career high percentage at the free throw line, 83%. So if that's something to go off. Now, keep in mind, that game against Portland was the first time we'd seen Wall, Oladipo, and Wood together. This team's just so new. That's something that I didn't even mention. Silas, new coach, new players coming off injury. There's just a number of different factors for this team. So for them to go on a run like they have is just incredibly impressive. I don't know if this team's going to make the playoffs. It's way too early to say. We've only seen one game with their three best players playing together. For them to be the number one ranked defense over the last 5 games, and for me to think that it's relatively sustainable, I don't think they're going to be the number one ranked defense. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I think they could still be a top 10, maybe a top 8 defense, and that's enough for them to be very competitive, considering they still have offensive firepower. And I really like what they're doing in Houston, because they've turned this team from a team that most people just had pinned as this was season over. Once they traded James Harden, after they started the season 3-6, it was season over for most people. Now all of a sudden, they're near 500, they're back in the playoff picture, and all of a sudden things are turning around. If you did enjoy the video, a like would be greatly appreciated. Also subbing to the channel. Have a good day. Catch you next time. Bye.